Kazakhstan, Kurdistan, take the mountains of that divide Asia and Europe, then very much so, you're going to sort of see that as the sort of prehistory. So let's sort of shortcut a few things. 2,000 years ago, the Romans, good organists, good organisers, had sort of significant contribution to make. 1,000 years ago, the Normans, they contributed, certainly with their understanding of various varieties and what you could do with those various varieties coming over from Brittany and Central Europe. 500 years ago, just down the road, we got Henry VIII creating the first structured orchards of Kent, amongst which there would have been many of the European varieties. He would have sent his gardeners and his minions into Europe, but it was either side of his domestic problems, not absolutely sure, but nonetheless. There was a significant contribution sort of made in that sort of period, certainly 500 years ago. 200 years ago, well, several fairly eminent gentlemen, amongst whom was Mr. Banks. Mr. Banks had been a botanist, Captain Cook, on his Australasian voyages. Mr. Wedgwood, son of the potter. Mr. Forsyth, you've probably got Forsythia in your garden hedgerow, named after him. They started the Horticultural Society in London, which became the London Horticultural Society, and they invited a very, very eminent gentleman of the time, Thomas Andrew Knight, who was certainly heavily into the sort of science of vegetables and fruiting bodies. And it was a fairly eminent body, and by 1820, working on about 33 acres at Chiswick in South London, they had created the first sort of substantial piece of information with regards to variety mixes. By 1860, it had been granted royal charter, became the Royal Horticultural Society. So we start to have a significant link between then and now, because at the turn of that century, Lord Hansbury donated Wisley to the RHS. Fast forward to the period just post the First World War, the RHS came together with MAF, who were the political arm of horticulture, Ministry of Agriculture, Fish and Food, MAF. And they created the fruit trials. It was so top fruit, apples, pears, plums, not cherries. Cherries like a calcareous substrate. Cherries took on a little bit later. Kent Farm Institute at Bourne. So the collections, the trials remained at Wisley for about 3 decades. And as you come to the very early 50s, shortcut a little bit, but MAF did a research of the North Kent fruit belt. They wanted a larger landmass. Science had sort of increased significantly, amount of material had increased significantly, they wanted a larger landmass. So researched the North Kent fruit belt from the Medway towns down to south of Canterbury, thence into the Weald, came up with this site, around about 150 acres, 60 hectares in today's money, thereabouts, and repropagated the material from Wisley to here. Okay? So for about 3 decades, from the very early 50s to the 80s, come into the 90s. Well, the science curators here at Brogdale were in those days White College, Imperial College, London University, working in conjunction with MAF. MAF pulled away from their responsibilities in 1990, and the trust here at Faversham was formed, the Horticultural Trust. And they were in evidence for about 10 years. 10 years the site was sold on. Various sort of financial problems associated with aspects of the development of the site, and it was sold on to Hillreed Land, a land development agency, in the year 2000. So fast forward a bit further and come to the period around about sort of 2008. 2008 was the period when MAF, of course it's now DEFRA, Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, went out to open tender for the scientific curation of the site. And as a result of that, that was won by the School of Horticulture and Biological Sciences at Reading University. Reading University are the scientific curators of the National Fruit Collections. And they work in conjunction with a commercial body, commercial in their own right. They've been in business for about 50 years, FAST, which stands for Farm Advisory Services Team, offering advice out there to the growers, both in terms of top fruit, strawberries, vines, and many other sort of horticultural products. So that's where we stand at the moment. Reading University science curators, fast in conjunction with them, looking after the estate and the site. And Brogdale Collections, I'm sure Defra would want me to say, looking after the educational side, development in terms of the sort of commercial viability of the site, and one or two other things, courses, for instance. So what we're going to do is take a very short cut into the pear collection. I'll tell you a bit about pears. We'll fast forward from there into the new apple collection, thence into the existing apple collection, because there's a certain difference between those two. Have a quick look at cider and get ourselves around to plums, because these ladies are desperate to test some plums. So I'm told, but you know, maybe they haven't got time. I don't know. It's important for you to recognise that the apple collection, when we get to it, is Britain's contribution to genetic resources as we look to our food for the future. That's the importance. It's of international importance, hugely important. So, into the pears. There's not a lot of shade in there, but what I'm going to do is sort of walk straight into the centre of the orchard, and we can sort of, rather than preambulate around in sort of the heat.